It is time for us to hit social media for cash tags. For that, we'd like to welcome in Andy Swan, the co-founder of LikeFolio.com, and we have Fast Market contributor Jenny Horn alongside us as well here in studio to talk some Square.
Some Square ahead of earnings post-market today. So the stock has surged 24% in just 2020 alone. So a pretty substantial move midside this. I mean, you saw they obviously sold off this week alongside the market's weakness, but they're actually up, I mean, 1.8% on the day. So this is his name that's actually doing pretty well. I mean, of course, now the markets are coming back, but Square has done a good job kind of holding off all these coronavirus fears. They were up 37% from their 12-month low in 2019, so pretty good price activity all in all with Square. But whenever we come on the show, we talk about Square, of course, versus their biggest competitor, and that's Venmo, owned by PayPal, or so Cash App, I guess, more so owned or compared to, of course, Venmo. And I had to do some research because I use Venmo, so I wasn't really sure the clear difference because I was talking to our producer and he was like, you use Cash App every time you go to one of those street festivals and you're paying with your phone and you have to use like the app.
Buying
that's
White
Cash
Claws
App.
And beers.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's pretty much the extent of my experience with it. But so I did some research. Venmo is considered more of a social network. So you can see all public payments and you can kind of see it on almost a news feed type thing. Cash App is a little bit more straightforward than that, but it seems that people really, really love talking about Cash App, and more so they love talking about Square. So whenever I do my Twitter search in the morning, I always assume that a name like Square won't get a lot of hits compared to like, say, a Starbucks or a Nike. And today I was completely wrong. So our first tweet says, I try to add Square whenever they sell off post earnings, which feels like 4 times a year. I love this company so much and I have used its products and services for a long time. So this was honestly the general theme I saw on Twitter. I was shocked the amount of love Square got. I mean, a name that isn't exactly, I think, the most exciting, but Andy, what is your consumer purchase intent telling you about Square as a broader company, or the happiness? Because I have to believe people are pretty happy based on what I saw today.
They are. Well, the happiness level has really leveled off over the last year. It started off extremely high, in terms of consumer happiness, but dropped, excuse me, as they added more and more users to the app. There was just more complaints. But in general, that's really stabilized as that Cash App has found a real scale. And so it's about where it should be. Most people really like the app. They do complain when things don't work, but it's in line with what we see with the Venmo and some other competitors. You know, the cool thing about the Cash App, which makes up a bulk of the mentions that we see at LikeFolio for this company, because it's in a peer-to-peer network. But the cool thing about it is they're doing such a great job of monetizing this base of users that they actually have positive revenue growth and retention. And that what that means is even if Square were to not add another user to their app, revenues would continue to climb off of the existing base. And so they're doing a fantastic job of bringing new users into the ecosystem and creating that virality that can make things really explode quickly, like we see in Square's case. But the way that they're monetizing it has been so effective that they really don't even need new users to grow revenue from their product, which is a great place to be.
Yeah, and if you look at this stock, Andy, it's off of its highs of 101, from a while ago. And if you compare it to maybe MasterCard and Visa and some of these other fintech companies, Square hasn't really outperformed, even though you're seeing more positive mentions according to your data and stuff. Is this one of those that the consumer's been driving everything, right? But is Square actually slowly moving away, and the fintechs like MasterCard and Visa with acquisitions are still eating their lunch?
Yeah, I mean, Square has a long way to go to compete with MasterCard and Visa, but the exponential level of their growth is really compelling. And I think when you look at the mentions of the Cash App, when you look at the mentions that we see of Square in general over time, it's one of those charts that every founder of every company takes into the venture capital office as their future projections and best case scenario, and Square is the one delivering on that. So I think they definitely have a long way to go. They work well with Visa and MasterCard. I don't see it as necessarily purely competitive. I think that there are advantages to being in the Square ecosystem that currently Visa and MasterCard don't provide. And so I think they have a really sticky user base that likes the product pretty well and that is growing really quickly. And most importantly, Square is figuring out a lot of different ways to monetize that user base, where in the past others have failed on a peer-to-peer network.
Okay, so Andy, Tom compares them to, of course, Visa and MasterCard, but I would say I consider Square's competitor PayPal because, of course, you think PayPal owns Venmo. So how does the happiness of PayPal's Venmo compare to Square's Cash App? Because I have to think those are directly correlated.
Yeah, pretty similar. It's pretty similar price action. I think, Square does a better job of promoting itself outside of its own network. They have cash giveaways that they do on certain Fridays. But the chart you can see now, this is the growth in terms of people talking about using the Cash App or Square transaction systems. This is an unbelievable chart. That far right bar is the current quarter's pace. But what we see is just up and to the right, quarter after quarter, just out delivering in terms of user growth. And that's, again, a really powerful place to be that I don't think Venmo and PayPal can compete with long term if Cash is able to hold this pace.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the mentions chart is super interesting because that is exactly what I saw on social media. Again, I was shocked with the amount of people just talking about Square because this seemed like a name where I'd have a hard time finding tweets. That was funny, and your mentions goes right into everything I saw. But our next tweet says, Square, the best thing to do in this name is to take a profit right now. If you're a bull, buy calls for earnings release. Even if earnings release is good, it won't go back over 83 for a while. Dead money near term, lower short term. So Tom, you mentioned this 101 level. I was looking more at the 87 level they were at last week. Of course, they're trading around 78 right now, but they are up 1.5% going into earnings. So do you think this is possible? They won't get above 83 for a while? 78, I think it's possible.
I think if you look at just the consumer data that Andy brought in from LikeFolio, it's pretty significant considering the fact that Square's pulled back 10%, correction territory. Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, all in correction territory right now, down over 10%. But whatever happened to this?
Oh
real
my
money.
Gosh. You're like Kevin
Real
Hinks
money.
right now. See,
You
it's
should
like,
always
it's
have-
like Kevin Hinks is here. He says cash is king, and I have to argue
always
with him.
have money in your wallet, and don't worry about that. You should always have a little bit of money. But the way that I look at this, if this is a name that you've been wanting to get long, this pullback's just created an opportunity for you. Just be risk defined because there's still outliers out there. In this name. And, I know Andy and the LikeFolio team only looks at U.S. data, and I think this is where the majority of what Square does as far as revenue and GPVs is based.
Andy, it's impossible to talk Square without talking Jack Dorsey just a little bit here. Obviously, the founder of Twitter and the CEO of Square as well. And I think, obviously, no one argues how Twitter has revolutionized how people consume news and really get content nowadays in real time. I think an argument could be made that Square has revolutionized how people, to Tom's point, no longer use cash and go into merchants, whether that's the cab or the local coffee shop, and are buying whatever goods and services that they want going forward now. But the underrated portion of this, I think, Andy, is the amount of data that Square is collecting on all of these consumers that they can somehow down the road, whether that is sell to a bank or become the bank themselves and start, loaning to these businesses. I don't know if you have thoughts on that and kind of the long-term outlook for Square.
No, you're exactly right. I think any time that you put yourself in the middle of a lot of financial transactions, and remember, Square allows payment processor, your local merchant to process transactions. They allow customers to buy goods. They allow customers, individuals to send money to each other. So they're in the middle of a lot of transactions, and so they do learn a lot about each one of those customers and each one of those merchants. And I think you're exactly right. The ability to potentially spin up a banking division, some loans, that sort of thing. I know that they've hinted at that in the past, or it's been looked at. It's not a core part of what they're doing today, but that remains another monetization angle. And so, Square is also getting a lot of revenue from people being able to buy or sell Bitcoin on the platform. I mean, they've figured out ways to turn these customer cash balances into mechanisms for growth for their own revenue. And so the more people that get into this ecosystem, the better the experience in the ecosystem, and the more Square can monetize each individual inside of it. It's a pretty powerful place to be.
Yeah, and Andy, I like that you mentioned the monetization because they're monetizing people not using cash, Tom. I mean, you go to a lot of restaurants in Chicago now and you can't even use cash. They're cash free. So a company like Square obviously benefits from that, and not calling you old, but get with the times.
Hey, I use both, but you've always got to have cash in your wallet.
No way.
Yeah, and I think, Andy, isn't the main, I don't remember if it's First Data, whoever offers it, but it's the Clover product from one of those financial services companies that's kind of the main competitor to Square. But kind of final thoughts here as we wrap things. Obviously, we have earnings coming out. From what you're seeing from your data, and obviously that's only tracking a portion of how they're getting their revenue, do you like Square where it is going forward into this earnings release, or is this more of a long-term story that you're kind of not really trading it around earnings?
Yeah, no, we've loved Square since the low 60s. Continue to love Square long term. I think that, like a lot of the tweets alluded to, this is a company that has a lot of volatility around earnings. There's an extreme amount of risk. What we're saying here in terms of growth, Square, everybody knows Square's growing fast. And so expectations are extremely high, and how they deliver those numbers matters a lot. And so I'm not really talking about earnings here. I don't think that there's a specific play I want to make into earnings. I just want to look for opportunities to own a booming company that could transform an industry at lower levels when I get those chances.
Really well said, Andy. We'll see what happens, and if there's a bit of a pullback, I'm assuming you guys will be looking for ways to buy Square on that dip, but we'll see what happens. Thanks to Andy and to Jenny.